Let's talk about a year that completely changed the course of English history, 1066. A single battle didn't just swap out one king for another. Nope, it was a total rewrite of a nation's identity, from the words people spoke to the laws they lived by. And right at the center of it all was one man, William the Conqueror.
And look, it's a fair question to ask. I mean, we're talking about almost 1,000 years ago, a world of knights and castles that feels, pretty far removed from our lives today. So why should we care about this one battle, this one conquest?
Well, here's why. Because the man who won didn't just take the crown. He seized an entire kingdom and then proceeded to rebuild it from the ground up, totally in his own image. This wasn't just a political changeover. It was a root and branch transformation.
To really get a handle on the man who would conquer a kingdom, you have to go back to the beginning. And his story, well, it isn't one of royal privilege. It's a story about a brutal, relentless fight just to survive. That's right. Long before anyone called him the Conqueror, they called him the Bastard. He was the illegitimate son of a duke, which meant his position was shaky from the day he was born. He wasn't handed power on a silver platter. He had to claw and fight for every single bit of it. You want to talk about a trial by fire? His childhood was exactly that. He inherits his father's title as just a kid and is immediately thrown into a world of pure chaos, dodging assassination attempts left and right. This brutal upbringing didn't break him. It forged him into this incredibly tough, hardened leader, a master of both strategy and survival. So what on earth gave him the idea that he had a right to the English throne? Well, it all came down to a promise. A very disputed promise from a distant relative, King Edward the Confessor. Honestly, it was a flimsy claim at best, but for a guy with William's ambition, that was more than enough to go on.
And that, of course, brings us to the pivotal year, 1066. King Edward dies, and the English crown goes to an Englishman, Harold Godwinson. For William, this wasn't just some political setback. Oh no, this was a call to war. And his response was going to be one for the history books.
Things happened so fast in 1066, it's kind of dizzying to think about. In January, Harold gets the crown. By September, William has pulled together this massive invasion army and is sailing across the English Channel. And then on October 14th, it all comes to a head at the Battle of Hastings. The battle itself was a clash of two totally different ways of fighting. The Anglo-Saxons had their famous shield wall, a disciplined, defensive fortress of men that was almost impossible to break. So what did William do? He threw his Norman cavalry at it, these mobile, heavily armed knights. His real genius was in faking retreats, tricking the English into breaking their formation and then turning to crush them. It worked.
But okay, winning one big battle is one thing. Actually holding on to a newly conquered, very hostile kingdom, that's a whole different ballgame. The victory at Hastings, that was just the very beginning of the fight.
Yeah, the conquest was far from over. For the next 20 years, William had to systematically put down one rebellion after another. This was not a peaceful handover of power. It was a long, brutal campaign of subjugation, and William carried it out with terrifying efficiency.
If you want a really stark example of just how ruthless he could be, look no further than the harrying of the North. When the north of England rebelled, he didn't just defeat their armies. He burned their crops, slaughtered their livestock, and basically laid waste to the entire region. It was so devastating, it depopulated huge areas for a generation. The message was crystal clear. Defy me, and this is what happens.
Okay, so fast forward 20 years. England is more or less under his thumb. Now, William is ready to roll out his ultimate tool of control, a way to know literally everything about his new kingdom. And he called it the Doomsday Book. You guys, this was absolutely revolutionary for its time. It was this massive, incredibly detailed survey of everything. Every piece of land, every mill, every person, every pig was counted and recorded. Sure, it was about collecting taxes, but it was so much more. It was an unbelievable instrument of centralized power. All right, so we've talked about the military conquest and the administration, but William's impact went way deeper than that. He fundamentally re-engineered the very fabric of English society, leaving a mark that you can still see today. You can really boil his legacy down to three main areas. He created a whole new power structure, he transformed the language, and he completely changed the landscape itself. First things first, he completely ripped out the old Anglo-Saxon ruling class. He took their land and gave it to his loyal Norman barons. Overnight, England had a new French-speaking aristocracy, and the whole system was replaced with a feudal structure popular in mainland Europe.
And this is where things get really interesting for our language today. You had the common folks speaking Old English, but the new ruling class was speaking Norman French. This created this weird linguistic divide that we can still see. It's why an English farmer's cow or pig became the French-speaking lord's beef or pork on the dinner table. Our language is a direct result of that fusion.
And finally, you could literally see the change on the horizon. William started building these massive stone castles all over the country. The Tower of London is probably the most famous one. These weren't just forts for defense. They were giant, intimidating symbols of Norman power, a constant reminder to everyone of who was in charge now.
So when you take a step back and look at the whole picture, what does the legacy of William the Conqueror really look like? It's a legacy built on raw ambition, shocking violence, and truly revolutionary change. William is just full of contradictions, isn't he? On the one hand, you have this absolutely ruthless warrior who seized a kingdom through bloodshed and terror. But on the other hand, you have this incredibly shrewd administrator who built a super efficient government from scratch, really laying the groundwork for the modern English state.
And what you get, in the end, is a totally new England. It was this hybrid thing, a fusion of the old Anglo-Saxon culture with this new, ambitious Norman layer on top. The nation was stamped, forever, with the mark of its conqueror.
And that leaves us with one last really big question to chew on. Was this incredibly violent takeover a kind of necessary evil? A brutal step that ultimately pushed England forward? Or was it just a national tragedy that snuffed out a unique culture in fire and blood? The answer, just like William himself, is anything but simple.